All right, so in this video, we're going to begin the process of reconstructing this example right here. Tokyo is a rainy city. We should call Tokyo rainy because Tokyo gets almost as much rain as London, and London is considered a rainy city. London gets 1584 millimeters of rain a year, whereas Tokyo gets 1530 millimeters of rain a year. All right, so remember from our previous video that the first thing that we have to do is identify the main conclusion, then we identify the main premises, and then we're going to look for subarguments. So that's the first thing that we're going to do here, is we are going to go through and highlight those within this original argument right here. Okay, so one of the best ways to identify main conclusions and main premises is to look for premise or conclusion indicators. So remember, these are words like since, therefore, due to, such that. So we're going to go through and look for that. There are no premise or conclusion indicators in this first sentence. However, there is a premise indicator in this second sentence. You might notice it right here. It's because. Because is a premise indicator. And because is a special sort of premise indicator. It's the kind of premise indicator where the premise comes after because and the conclusion comes before. So because as a premise indicator tells us something about the premise and something about the conclusion. Now let's first take a look at the conclusion, because remember, that's our first step. Our first step is to identify the main conclusion. All right, so it says we should call Tokyo rainy because such and such and such. If we look at the overall argument, the whole argument is geared toward giving us reasons for why Tokyo is a rainy city. And really, this first half right here of this sentence is just a different way of putting this original sentence. Tokyo is a rainy city. So I'm going to go ahead and identify this first sentence as our conclusion. Our conclusion is that Tokyo is a rainy city. And again, remember, we have to be charitable when we're reconstructing these arguments. And so we are going to overlook some of the minute differences in English between we should call Tokyo rainy and Tokyo is a rainy city. Because for the sake of sentences and propositional logic, those differences don't really matter. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at what comes after the because, the second half of this sentence. The second half of the sentence says Tokyo gets almost as much rain as London, and London is considered a rainy city. So that means this is one of our premises. Tokyo gets almost as much rain as London. And then remember, and is a logical word, right? That's an indicator for a logical conjunction. And so that doesn't really show up in a premise, right? So that means that what comes after because is actually two premises. It's one, the premise that Tokyo gets almost as rain as London, and two, the premise that London is considered rainy. Now, we have two premises and we have a conclusion. So what do we do with this last sentence right here? What do we do with the sentence, London gets 1584 millimeters of rain a year, whereas Tokyo gets 1530 millimeters of rain a year? So now we want to ask ourselves the question, what is that sentence doing, right? And it looks like what it's doing is it's comparing the amount of rain London gets to the amount of rain Tokyo gets. And in fact, it's saying London gets a little more rain than Tokyo, right? Because London gets 54 millimeters more rain than Tokyo. And so that sounds a lot like a technical version of saying that Tokyo gets almost as much rain as London, right? So it looks like what it's doing is it's giving us explicit figures that argue for this main premise right here. So it looks like this argues for that. And so what that means is that the last sentence is a sub-argument, and it's a sub-argument for our first premise. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that in yellow. So the next step, and remember whereas, right, is another sort of English indicator word for a conjunction. So whereas doesn't end up in our argument. What we have is we have two premises, London gets a certain amount of rain and Tokyo gets a certain amount of rain, that are premises in the argument for that first premise, for Tokyo gets almost as much rain as London. Okay, so now that we have all that in place, what we want to do is we want to write out what we have so far, knowing that there are probably going to be hidden premises that we haven't arrived at. We want to write it out below. right? And so we're going to write our premises and then our conclusion down here. So let's start with our first premise. Now remember, our first premise was that Tokyo gets almost as much rain as London. And remember now as well, we have a sub-argument for that premise, right? It's these two premises right here. London gets 584 millimeters, Tokyo gets 530 millimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and write those sub-arguments, and I'm going to write those as A and B, right? That's how I'm going to notate this sub-argument. So the sub-argument starts out, London gets 1584 millimeters of rain, and I'm going to mark that or of as a slash. So rain per year. And our second premise is that Tokyo gets 1530 millimeters of rain per year. All right, and now I'm going to leave some space right here, right? So I'm going to leave a couple of lines free just in case we have some hidden premises to that argument, because that argument, that sub-argument looks suspiciously incomplete to me. So I'm going to leave a couple of lines, and then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to write our second main premise. And remember, our second main premise is highlighted in red. So that second main premise is London is considered a rainy city. All right. And again, I'm going to leave a couple of lines. Why? Well, because again, that main argument looks suspiciously incomplete. It looks like one where we might have a couple more hidden premises in the works. And so last but not least, I'm going to write our conclusion. And I'm just going to write our conclusion at the moment with 3 dots. And that's because I don't know how many premises I'm actually going to have, right? Right now I have 2. So in principle, the conclusion would be numbered 3, but we might have some hidden premises in the works. So I'm not going to write that number yet. And that conclusion, remember, right, is that Tokyo is a rainy city. Now, in the next video, we are going to consider what those hidden premises might be, and we're going to tighten up this argument.